You already know the feeling. The moment before you send a message, when you hesitate and reread it 3 times, not for grammar, but to make sure it cannot be misread as too much, or too little, or the wrong kind of person. The moment after, you speak in a meeting or at a dinner table, when you immediately scan the room, not to see if you were understood, but to see if you were approved of. The way a single critical comment from someone you barely know can unseat an entire day. The way praise from the right person can feel, for a moment, like proof that you exist in the correct way. This is not weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is not something that a different morning routine or a better attitude will resolve. It is a psychological structure. One that was built for reasons that made complete sense at the time, by a person who no longer exists, the child you were. And that has been operating largely unchallenged ever since. Alfred Adler called it the need for approval. And he considered it one of the most powerful and most quietly destructive forces in modern human life. Not because wanting to be liked is wrong. It is not wrong. Connection and belonging are genuine human needs, as fundamental as food and warmth. Adler understood this better than almost any psychologist of his era. The problem is not the desire for approval. The problem is the dependency on it, the psychological structure in which your sense of your own worth, your right to occupy, space to hold opinions, to make choices, becomes contingent on its constant external confirmation. Because that dependency, Adler observed, does not produce the connection it seeks. It produces something that looks like connection from the outside, but feels, from the inside, like a performance that never ends. Today, I want to take you through what Adler understood about the approval-seeking structure, where it comes from, how it operates, what it costs you, and what he considered the only genuine path to the freedom on the other side of it. Not the freedom of not caring what anyone thinks. That is not freedom. That is simply another form of disconnection. The freedom Adler pointed toward is more demanding and more real than that. It is the freedom of a person who has found something in themselves that does not require constant external confirmation to remain true. Adler's diagnosis of approval seeking was precise and, for his patients, often deeply uncomfortable to hear, because it required them to consider that what they had been calling sensitivity or conscientiousness, or simply caring about others, was, at its root, something more self-protective than it appeared. Approval-seeking, in the Adlerian framework, is not primarily about other people. It is about the self. Specifically, about a self that is concluded it cannot trust its own assessment of its own worth. How does this conclusion form? Adler traced it, again and again in clinical practice, to the earliest social experiences of childhood. The child who discovered that love and attention were conditional on performance, on compliance, on being a particular kind of person, draws a conclusion that feels like fact. I am acceptable when I meet the standard. I am at risk when I do not. This conclusion is not irrational. Given the child's situation, their complete dependence on the adults around them, their inability to survive without approval from the people who hold their entire world, it is the only reasonable response. The problem is that the conclusion outlives the situation. The adult carries the child's logic into a world where survival no longer depends on approval. But the nervous system has not received this update. Adler identified what he called the approval seeker's core belief. I am only as valuable as others perceive me to be. From this belief, an entire behavioral architecture emerges with its own internal logic. Asterisk. If my worth is located in others' perceptions, then managing those perceptions becomes the primary task of my life. Asterisk. Every interaction becomes an evaluation. Every relationship becomes, in part, an audition. Every conversation has a subtext. Am I passing? The energy this requires is enormous. Asterisk. The approval seeker is managing, at almost every social moment, two simultaneous streams of experience: the actual interaction and the continuous internal monitoring of how that interaction is being received and what it means about their acceptability. This monitoring produces what Adler called the persona prison, a life lived primarily in the management of image rather than in genuine engagement with reality. Asterisk. The person becomes expert at reading rooms, at adjusting their tone and position, and even their opinions to match what the current audience seems to require. They become, in the deepest sense, responsive, but not to their own interior. Responsive to the perceived preferences of whoever is in front of them. And the cost of this responsiveness, accumulated over years, is a particular kind of exhaustion. Asterisk. Not the exhaustion of physical effort, but the exhaustion of never having been fully present in your own life. Of having been always slightly elsewhere, monitoring, adjusting, performing. Adler also observed a phenomenon he found both tragic and deeply human: the approval seeker who succeeds. The person who becomes genuinely excellent at generating approval, who learns to read and meet social expectations with such precision that praise and validation flow toward them consistently, discovers that the approval, when it arrives, does not do what it was supposed to do. It does not quiet the underlying belief. Asterisk. It confirms the strategy without resolving the wound, because the belief was never really about whether approval could be obtained. It was about whether the self that obtained it was real. Approval seeking does not always announce itself in obvious ways. Asterisk. It is a highly adaptable structure that takes on different forms depending on the individual's personality, history, and social context. Asterisk. Adler documented 5 primary manifestations, and I want to explore each one in enough depth that you can recognize the one or ones that are most familiar to you. The first phase is chronic agreement. This is the most visible form. The person who finds it genuinely difficult to hold a position that conflicts with the people around them. Asterisk. Not because they lack opinions, but because the experience of disagreement triggers an anxiety disproportionate to the situation. The chronic agreeer has learned that harmony is safety. Asterisk. That conflict, even productive, respectful, necessary conflict, carries the risk of rejection. Asterisk. And rejection to the approval-dependent self is not merely unpleasant. It is threatening at a level that feels existential. The result is a person who is extraordinarily pleasant to be around and extraordinarily difficult to actually know. Asterisk. Because the version of themselves they present is always calibrated to be acceptable, which means it is never quite fully real. The second phase is overperformance. Asterisk. This is the approval seeker who has learned that exceptional achievement generates exceptional approval, and who has organized their entire life around the production of achievement as a mechanism for securing worth. This is perhaps the most socially celebrated form of approval seeking because its output, genuine accomplishment, is indistinguishable from the outside from achievement pursued for its own sake. Asterisk. But the internal experience is entirely different. The overperformer is not creating. They are auditioning. Asterisk. Permanently. The third face is what Adler called the helper who cannot receive. Asterisk. The person who is extraordinarily generous with their time, their attention, their resources, but who experiences genuine difficulty accepting help, care, or gratitude from others. Adler's analysis of this pattern was counterintuitive and precise. The compulsive helper is not primarily motivated by altruism. Asterisk. They are motivated by the need to be needed, to occupy a position of indispensability that cannot be taken away. If I am the one who gives, I control the terms of my value. If I receive, I become dependent on someone else's generosity, which means my worth is in their hands rather than mine. The fourth face is the opinion chameleon, the person whose views, tastes, and even values shift, subtly depending on who they are with. Asterisk. They are not lying. Exactly. Each version of themselves is genuinely felt in the moment. Asterisk. But the consistency that would allow others to fully know them, and that would allow them to fully know themselves, is missing. The opinion chameleon has learned that having strong, distinct, potentially controversial opinions is a social risk. Asterisk. So opinions are held lightly, qualified extensively, and released easily when pressure is applied. Asterisk. The result is a kind of social camouflage that keeps the person safe and keeps them invisible. Simultaneously. The fifth and perhaps most painful face of approval seeking is what Adler called the paralysis of the potential. The person who has a genuine vision, a real creative ambition, a specific contribution they want to make, and who cannot move toward it because movement would require exposure, and exposure risks judgment, and judgment might confirm the underlying fear. So the book is never written. The business is never started. The conversation that needs to happen is indefinitely postponed. Asterisk. The life that is genuinely theirs remains in permanent preparation, always almost ready, never quite beginning. This is, in Adler's clinical observation, the approval-seeking structure at its most costly. Asterisk. Not because the person suffers most visibly. They often appear fine, even comfortable. Asterisk. But because what is being sacrificed is not just ease or social smoothness. Asterisk. What is being sacrificed is the life. Adler's answer to the approval-seeking structure was not what most of his patients expected. They came to him hoping he would teach them not to care what others thought, to become thicker-skinned, more self-sufficient. Less affected by the opinions of people around them, he offered them something different, asterisk, and for many of them, more difficult. He told them that the solution to seeking approval was not to need people less, asterisk. It was to engage with them more genuinely. This is the paradox at the center of Adler's psychology, and it is worth sitting with until it becomes clear. The approval seeker, Adler argued, does not have too much investment in other people. They have the wrong kind of investment. They are deeply, exhaustingly preoccupied with other people, but not with those people's actual lives, needs, or inner worlds. Asterisk. They are preoccupied with those people's perceptions, with what those people think of them. This is not genuine social interest. Asterisk. It is social anxiety wearing the clothes of social engagement. Genuine social interest, what Adler called Gemeinschaftsvoll, is the capacity to be genuinely curious about other people. Asterisk. To care about their actual well-being rather than their opinion of you. Asterisk. To contribute to their lives, not because contribution generates approval, but because the contribution itself has value. And here is what Adler observed in clinical practice. Again and again, the moment a person genuinely shifts their attention from how they are being perceived to what they can actually contribute, the need for approval begins, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, to loosen its grip. Not because they have become indifferent to others' opinions, asterisk, but because those opinions are no longer load-bearing, asterisk. They are no longer the primary evidence on which the self's worth is assessed. Adler was specific about what genuine contribution looks like in practice. Asterisk, it is not grand altruism or dramatic self-sacrifice. It is something much more ordinary and much more accessible. It is the quality of attention you bring to a conversation. Asterisk. Whether you are genuinely listening or monitoring how you are coming across while someone else speaks. It is the usefulness of the work you bring to your professional life, whether you are creating something real or managing. Impressions of creation. Asterisk. It is the honesty of your presence in relationships, whether the person in front of you is encountering you or encountering a performance of you. Adler also introduced what he considered the most practical single tool for dismantling the approval-seeking structure, what he called the courage to be disliked. Asterisk, asterisk. This phrase, which became the title of one of the most widely read books on Adlerian psychology, is frequently misunderstood. Asterisk. It does not mean seeking conflict. It does not mean performing indifference. Asterisk. It does not mean the theatrical rejection of others' opinions as a statement of independence. It means something quieter and more demanding. The willingness to hold a genuine position, make a genuine choice, live a genuinely authentic life, even in the knowledge that some people, for their own reasons, will not approve. Because this is the truth that the approval-seeking structure will not allow you to see. Not everyone will approve of you, regardless of what you do. Asterisk. The most careful management of impression, the most exhausting calibration of self-presentation will not produce universal approval. Some people will disapprove. Some people will misunderstand. Asterisk. Some people will simply not resonate with who you are. The question is not how to prevent this. Asterisk. The question is whether you can live your actual life, the one that belongs specifically to you. In the presence of this fact, Adler believed you could. Asterisk. He staked his clinical career on the conviction that every human being possessed the capacity for this courage. Asterisk. Not as a personality trait they either had or lacked. As a practice, asterisk, something that could be developed. One small act of genuine self-expression at a time. Asterisk, asterisk. What follows are 5 practices drawn directly from Adler's clinical work, the specific interventions he used with patients to begin dismantling the approval-seeking structure from the inside. Asterisk, they are not quick fixes. They are orientations. Asterisk, ways of moving through specific daily situations that practice consistently begin to change the underlying architecture. The first practice is what Adler called distinguishing tasks. Asterisk. He drew a sharp distinction between your tasks, the things that are genuinely within your sphere of responsibility, and others' tasks, which include their opinions, reactions, and choices about how to perceive you. The approval seeker's fundamental error in Adler's analysis is the consistent intrusion into others' tasks. Asterisk, the assumption that you are responsible for managing how people see you. Asterisk, that their approval is something you must produce through the correct behavior, the practice of task. Distinction begins with a simple question in any moment of approval anxiety. Whose task is this? If someone chooses to disapprove of you, that is their task, their internal process, their conclusion, their responsibility. Your task is to act with integrity. What they make of that action belongs entirely to them. The second practice is what Adler called contribution inventory. Asterisk, at the end of each day. Rather than reviewing how you were perceived, who seemed pleased or displeased, who approved or withheld approval, you review what you actually contributed. Asterisk, what did you create, offer, or give that had genuine value for someone beyond yourself? This is not a self-congratulatory exercise. Asterisk, it is a reorientation of the evaluative lens. Asterisk, the question you are training yourself to ask is not, did people approve of me today? Asterisk, it is, did I contribute anything real? Over time, this shift in question changes the self-assessment mechanism. Asterisk, the inner auditor, the one who has been tallying approval scores, begins to receive different data. And different data produces different conclusions about worth. The third practice is what Adler called the small act of honest expression. Asterisk, not grand gestures of authenticity. Asterisk, not dramatic confrontations with people whose approval you have been seeking. Asterisk, something smaller and more sustainable. One honest opinion per day, offered in a context where you would previously have deflected or agreed to keep the peace. Asterisk, one genuine preference, expressed rather than suppressed. Asterisk, one moment in which you say what you actually think to someone whose approval matters to you, and allow them to respond however they respond. Adler's clinical observation was that the approval-seeking structure is maintained, more than anything else, by the accumulated avoidance of these small moments. Asterisk, and conversely, that each small act of honest expression, however uncomfortable, provides direct experiential evidence against the core belief. You expressed yourself genuinely. Asterisk, disapproval may have come, and you survived it. The fourth practice is the deliberate interruption of social monitoring. Asterisk, this requires a specific kind of attention, a capacity to notice. In the middle of interactions, when you have shifted from genuine engagement to self-monitoring, the moment you notice, I am no longer listening to this person. I am watching how I am coming across. That moment of noticing is the practice. Asterisk, you do not need to resolve it or eliminate it. Asterisk, you simply return your attention to the actual person in front of you. Asterisk, to their words, their face, their actual experience. This is simple but not easy. Asterisk, the monitoring reflex is deeply habituated. It has been firing for years. Asterisk, but each time you notice it and redirect, you are weakening a neural pathway and strengthening a different one. Asterisk, over weeks and months, The monitoring becomes less automatic. The fifth and final practice is what Adler called the construction of self-evaluation criteria. Asterisk. If your worth has been assessed by external approval, the question becomes, what would you use instead? Adler did not believe the answer was simply self-love or unconditional self-acceptance. These can become, in his framework, merely a different form of narcissistic self-focus. Asterisk. He believed the answer was contribution-based self-evaluation. Asterisk. Did I act with integrity today? Asterisk. Did I bring genuine attention to the people I encountered? Asterisk. Did I do the work I am here to do? These questions do not require a single other person's answer. Asterisk. They are yours to assess. And as you develop the capacity to assess them honestly, not self-flatteringly, not self-critically, but accurately, your self-evaluation becomes less dependent on the mirror of other people's perceptions. The self, in Adler's framework, is not found in what others reflect back to us. Asterisk. It is constructed through what we choose to do with what we have been given. Asterisk. Adler was a clinician. First. Asterisk. He wanted his patients to be able to see change as it happened, to have concrete evidence that the work was producing something real. Asterisk. What follows are 6 signs that the approval-seeking structure is genuinely beginning to shift. The first sign is a new quality of presence in conversation. Asterisk. You notice that you are actually hearing what people say rather than simultaneously composing your response and monitoring their reaction to your last one. Asterisk. Genuine listening. The kind that is aware of the other person rather than of itself begins to feel more natural than it once did. Asterisk. The second sign is a reduced recovery time after criticism or disapproval. Asterisk. Not that it stops mattering. It does not stop mattering. Asterisk. But the time between receiving a negative reaction and returning to your own equilibrium shortens measurably. Asterisk. What once took days begins to take hours. What took hours begins to take minutes. The criticism is processed as information rather than as verdict. The third sign is the discovery that saying no is no longer an event. For the chronic approval seeker, declining a request, any request, from almost anyone, carries a weight disproportionate to the actual consequence. Asterisk. As the structure loosens, the no becomes simply a decision rather than a crisis. Asterisk. It is given once, without extended justification, without the elaborate apologetic scaffolding that once accompanied it. The fourth sign is a new relationship with your own opinions. Asterisk. You notice that you can hold a view in a room where others hold different views, without the urgent need to either convert them or abandon your position. Asterisk. Disagreement becomes interesting rather than threatening. The other person's differing perspective becomes information rather than a judgment on your worth. The fifth sign is the experience Adler considered most significant. The discovery that genuine connection becomes possible in a way that performance-based connection never was. Asterisk. When you stop managing others' perceptions of you, something unexpected happens. People begin to actually encounter you. And being genuinely encountered, known rather than approved of, turns out to be what you were looking for all along. The sixth sign is perhaps the simplest and most profound. Asterisk. You find yourself at various moments throughout the day. Not thinking about yourself at all. Asterisk, absorbed in work, in conversation, in something that has captured your genuine attention, and the monitoring apparatus. For those moments is simply quiet. This is not enlightenment. Asterisk. It is not the permanent resolution of a lifelong structure. Asterisk. It is something more modest and more real. Evidence that the hold is loosening. Asterisk. That the question of whether you are approved of does not have to occupy the center of every waking hour. That there is a life on the other side of the audition. And that it is available to you. Asterisk. Alfred Adler did not believe that the approval-seeking structure could be eliminated by an act of will. He had seen too many patients try. The sudden decision to simply stop caring. The performance of not caring. The new identity as someone who needed no one's approval and wanted everyone to know it. This, he recognized, was simply the same structure wearing different clothes. Asterisk. The person who loudly does not need approval is still organized around approval, around its conspicuous absence. What he believed was possible was something quieter and more durable. Asterisk. The gradual shift from a self that is located in others' perceptions to a self that is located in its own genuine engagement with life, not a self that does not care what others think. Asterisk. A self that cares about something more than what others think. The work, the relationship, the contribution. Asterisk. The specific, unrepeatable. Genuinely use life that is available to you on the other side of the performance. Leave the number 333 in the comments. In the Adlerian framework. 333 represents the moment of genuine self-location. The instant when you make a choice, take a position, or offer something real. Not because you know how it will be received, but because it is true. Asterisk. Not the elimination of approval seeking. Asterisk. Its first genuine loosening. If something in today's exploration has landed as recognition, rather than information, if you have heard something here that names what you have been living, leave 333. Let this community witness where you are. Subscribe to Alfred Adler philosophy. Asterisk. Because the work of becoming genuinely free, not free from people, but free within yourself, in their presence, is not a single video's work. It is a life's practice, and you deserve a companion for it.